Hello everybody and welcome back to Gamblecast. I'm your host Richard Delaney, joined today by Dean Ryan, contributor for Gambling.com and horse racing fanatic. Dean, how are you today?
Really good, Richard. Pleasure to be on Gamblecast and educating a few people about a bit of horse racing nuance.
Good stuff, looking to dive into it. Today we are here to chat about anti-post betting. How do you do it? When should you do it? Why should you do it? We're going to find out. I've got a couple of questions for Dean here to go over. Before we dive in, I'd like to remind all listeners that you can find Gamblecast on iTunes, Spotify, SoundCloud and iHeartRadio. If you aren't already listening on your favourite platform, don't forget to tweet us after this episode at Gambling.com and let us know what you thought. So without further ado, Dean, let's talk anti-post. So first off, for those listening who are unsure, can you briefly explain what anti-post betting is?
Yeah. Betting anti-post means you are placing a bet on the outcome of, as we're talking about horse racing, a race in the future before the day of the race. Generally, anti-post betting means some way in advance. It's an open term. Don't need to decide or decipher it exactly, but it means you are placing a bet on something to happen in the future, hence anti-post. Post being the post that they pass when they start and finish.
How far out from a race generally, or does it depend, will an anti-post market be created?
Absolutely does depend, and it depends mainly on the size of the event that we're talking about. So you traditionally will not find anti-post markets on your run-of-the-mill racing at Fontwell or Leicester or whatever else is going on next week. You just won't see it. If there is a feature race for, say, the weekend racing coming up, you might find betting on that, say, on a Monday or a Tuesday ahead of Saturday. But if you're talking about big events like the Cheltenham Festival and Grand National, 12 months of the year, 365 days of the year, you can bet on those big events, and that's anti-post betting.
Okay, and how do bookies decide in those markets, like when we're looking that far back, how are they deciding what horses to price up?
Okay, well, the easiest way to kind of describe this is if you take the Grand National and you take jumps horses, as in horses that come back year after year. If you have a Grand National being run when it is always run and the first four come past the post in the order that they come past in, normally the winner of that race, providing he's not already a pensioner, normally be around 9 or 10 years old, will be favourite or very much close to favourite for that race next year. So there's no entries made for that race just yet, but what they'll do is they'll, on the basis of who they think is a Grand National contender, bookmakers will line up sometimes more than 20 horses for that race the following year. So you can bet on the Grand National right now for this year, next year, no more than that, but at the same time, the same horses are involved. So bookmakers will make an educated guess. They know more about racing than most of us, and they will make an educated guess of who's likely to be in it. When you talk about a race like the Derby, those horses are actually entered in there at yearlings, so they will be potentially in the market a long way in advance. What we don't know is if they're any good or not. So bookmakers have got everything in their favour really when they do those kind of things. But so that's how they work it out. If there are entries, very easy for them to price it up. If there aren't entries, they just make educated guesses on the horses people would like to bet. One other element I would throw into that is that if you fancy a horse for a certain race, even though there's not entries, you can ask your bookmaker through Twitter or live chat to get the traders to add this horse to a certain market, and that happens a lot.
Okay, and so from a punter's point of view, the objective when betting anti-post, is it just to get a better price? Is that what it is?
You should definitely not place a bet if you're not looking to get a better price than you would on the day if you're looking for an anti-post bet. If you've got to try and line up things that can be in your favour, you may have just watched a horse, say for example, win the Royal Sun Alliance Chase at Cheltenham. Traditionally, if you win that race, you're a Gold Cup horse for the following year, and bookmakers will clamber over themselves to tell you what price that horse is now for next year's Gold Cup. So what you're trying to do is to gain some kind of advantage. Remember, everyone's on the same page. We're all trying to get the best possible price we can get for a result that we think is going to happen. So I would say the key thing is to make sure that you know enough about what's going to happen. Hunch bets, small stakes, no problem. Throw them everywhere and you will get some luck. But if you're making an informed anti-post bet, you want to know a few things. One, is the horse likely to turn up there? Has someone told you something? Or have you heard the trainer say, well, we're definitely going for the Arkle next year? Then you know exactly what they're going to do. And you've got to line them up. And then you've got to think about more important things. And we'll probably come to that. Will the conditions be right on the day? Is the horse likely to take in the right trial races? Are there reasons why maybe an ancestor of this horse did something that you're hoping this one will do? And they're all the kind of things that you try to line up.
Okay, cool. And so following in line with that, when do you think, is there a sweet spot? Is there a best time to get value out of anti-post prices? Or is it contingent on what all you just said?
Yeah, it's contingent on what I just said, but there is a best time, because if you do miss the boat, then you're getting a price you can probably pick up on the day. So I think it comes down to personal experience, and it comes down to your own intent or what you think might be the case of a certain event in the future. Obviously, that's what anti-post betting is, but you might only have a very small window. So horse dots up in a race in a trial for a big race, his anti-post price or her anti-post price, it will change dramatically very quickly. So if you can be ready, if you're watching a race and think, if this wins this, I fancy it for the Derby, you might want to be hovering over the bet screen for it to win the Derby as it's running that race. You don't get a very long period of time to get involved. There are other ways about it. So if you're talking about, say, the Cheltenham Festival, and you catch a trainer interviewed about a completely different horse on the TV, but then, the interviewer is clever enough to say, I wonder how so-and-so is getting on. Is he still online for, let's say, the RSA chase again? And he says, yeah, all systems go. You have a very small window before that information filters through to a betting market.
Okay.
And other people try and take advantage of the same things.
Okay, cool. So a lot of it's about trying to stay ahead, essentially.
Absolutely. Be on the ball as much as you can. That's where you get the most value out of your anti-post bets.
Gotcha. And so aside from there being bigger value, we're talking about the odds there. Is there any other benefits to betting anti-post?
I think what you're trying to do is create yourself a position, if you think about a big Cheltenham race, where you might have a couple of horses backed in advance at prices that are better than you might be looking at on the day. That's your intention in an anti-post bet. And then that gives you an opportunity to create your own book on the race. So if I've backed 2 horses for the Gold Cup and I get to Gold Cup week and they are, say, first and second favourite and I've got them at better prices, it can allow you to either have a saver, lay off some of that bet on the exchange, lock in a profit, or maybe then go for a third horse thinking I've got the market pretty much covered. So one, you want to win money, anti-post bet. You want to try and pick a horse that's going to go off a short price, then you've backed it at. That's the success of an anti-post bet. Also, I think you're trying to take a position on the race that might allow you to do something different on the day that you wouldn't be able to do if you hadn't have already covered your other fancies.
Okay, very interesting. At what point should I give up on betting anti-post and wait for final decks?
I think as soon as you realise that the market is saturated enough to have all of those little snippets of information that I talked about, everyone's intentions on where they're going to run, or all the trial races are done. So let's say typically a week or two out from the Cheltenham Festival, very few changes are going to happen unless they're negative changes, as in a horse might get injured or is suddenly ruled out. I think at that point you realise the market knows what you know.
Yeah.
And therefore, you're probably not going to get much value. The other thing that kicks into that is that when you get to a big event like, say, the Cheltenham Festival, bookmakers will be falling over themselves to get new custom just before the start of the event. And therefore, you might think, well, I got 7-1 about a horse and that looks really good value. But on the day, because everyone's clambering to take everyone's money in the bookmaker sense, they go 8-1. Suddenly you haven't got the 7s, although it looked like a good bet at the time. If the race was run on the day, probably was a good bet. But on the day when everyone's ultra competitive, you want to make sure you take best advantage of the market. So I would say anti-post betting is not dead. Everything I said before applies in terms of, can you find the value? Can you get something into your betting strategy before everyone else does? But as you get close, you've got to remember the competitive nature of the bookmakers might give you a little bit more value on the day. So I would say if you're looking at big events, anything between 2 or 3 weeks before the race, you're probably better off waiting unless you know something.
Okay.
Or think you know something that the bookmakers don't yet know or haven't factored into their prices. If you can wait for the day, then extra places apply, bonuses apply. Sometimes then your anti-post bet doesn't look as shrewd.
Cool. Okay. So what, if any, are telltale signs that a horse is not worth betting on anti-post?
Yeah, this really comes down to the kind of history of the horse or the trainer perhaps in question. So if you're looking at betting on a horse in advance of, say, a Grand National, and you look at the trainer of that horse having had runners previously in a Grand National, I'd be interested to know whether that trainer targets the race, whether that trainer has a good history with the event in question. And also the nature of the horse is important here, because if that horse is likely to take in a very grueling trial race beforehand, chances are it could miss the race, they might not get it right, could get injured because you're talking about jumps racing. And also some horses just have a history of going in and out of, I would say, good form. We've taken the likes of an Apple's Jade, who everyone will know very well, won just recently. This horse goes in and out of season. And that happens to mares, but particularly to her. So she might turn up an odds-on favourite for a race. The trainer might announce in the morning she's in season, we don't know how she's going to run, and then she goes and runs dismally. And all you've done is pick the right horse for the right race, and you're unfortunate. Yeah. So there are certain types of horses that maybe don't fit an anti-post betting strategy. But if you are getting a value price and they still turn up lower odds on the day, you can still make money even if they don't win.
Okay, cool. And then, I mean, on the flip of that, are there any other signs that says to you the horse is worth betting?
I think when you talk about that, really what you're looking for are progressive types of horses. So
Okay.
everything I said in the negative way there, you can flip to a positive. So a trainer has a fantastic record in a certain type of race. You spot that they've just won a trial race for that event in a similar pattern that they've made in years before. This is something I always like to look at for anti-post races. So if you find a trainer likes to target a certain race at Lingfield for, say, a Derby horse, and they have entered up 2 horses for that very race who also have Derby entries, I think you're onto a winner there in terms of if one of those horses wins that trial, it's going to be their main fancy for the Derby, and I've already spotted the pattern. So you are always looking for patterns with anti-post. So let's say a trainer enters those 2 horses for Lingfield, ends up with 1 run on a day, you've backed both anti-post for the Derby, it wins, suddenly it's second or third favourite for the Derby, because everyone else then will cotton on to the fact that, hold on a minute, let's say it's John Gosden, he's won this race 5 times before, 4 of them have gone to the Derby and won it, and that's kind of what you're looking for. You've got to be a little bit ahead of the curve, and not that bookmakers won't be as well, but they've got a million other things going on. If you can focus your strategy into a certain anti-post races where trends will help you, you can often get ahead.
Okay, cool. So for anybody who is considering betting anti-post and who maybe hasn't done it before, just on a very practical level, what actually happens if they place a bet anti-post and the horse doesn't run?
Yeah, well, there's a few caveats to this. So generally, anti-post rules apply to anti-post betting. Now, that sounds like it makes a lot of sense, but there are a few differences. So if you're having a bet long range on a horse race at a fancy enough price, there are a few things that will apply. You'll often get slightly better place terms. Let's say you're betting in a field that has 20 runners in it right now for an anti-post bet, but when they turn up on the day, there's only 6, but you got it at each way terms, quarter the odds in 3 places. You'll still get honoured with that. But unfortunately, if your horse doesn't run, you have lost your bet. So there are some advantages and some negatives. The other part is that, say, for example, we talked about the Cheltenham Festival. Anti-post betting can apply there 12 months of the year, but sometimes, and generally within 4 or 5 weeks of the event, when that anti-post betting has dried up because people think they know everything they're going to know, they will go non-runner, no bet. Non-runner, no bet in an anti-post market is an anti-post bet, but at the same time, if your horse doesn't turn up, you will get your money back. So that's why traditionally when we talk about whether it's a good time to place an anti-post bet, if you're just on the cusp of when that might change to a non-runner, no bet race, you're best to wait. When you do wait, though, you will see that the prices contract considerably on the basis the bookmaker knows that even though you're betting in advance, got to give you its money back either way. So you get to a certain point, and we're kind of at it now around Cheltenham Festival, around kind of beginning of February, where some bookmakers will go non-runner, no bet on, say, the 4 championship races. So you've got the 4 big races, one every day, that they will now take non-runner, no bet prices. But what you'll see is that those prices are lower. So if you were, say, to look at an odds comparison site like one of ours, you'll actually hit a point where you see one horse is 5-1, but with another bookmaker is 8-1. Now, 8-1 looks the obvious bet, but the 5-1's giving you money back if it doesn't run, and the 8-1 isn't. So there, you have another decision to make. I want to bet anti-post, but do I want to take the 8-1 and get a bit of value, or do I want to take 5s knowing I get my money back? It's a nuance that you have to remember. Okay,
cool. And then, kind of falling in with that as well. If a horse doesn't run as part of an accumulator, we'll say, for example, I've got a treble and the anti-post horse doesn't run, does that simply become a double at that stage, or is that differ bookie to bookie?
Again, so we're in the non-runner, no bet area here as well. If you were to do that right now in championship races, say at the Cheltenham Festival, and they were all non-runner, no bet, you're say 4-timer, let's call it a 4-timer accumulator on 4 horses across those races. If 1 didn't run and you were in the non-runner, no bet market, you're on a treble. 2 didn't run, you're on a double. And if 3 didn't run, you're on a single. And if all of them didn't run, you just get your money back. But if you're doing the anti-post market and you only had that one leg of a bet, so let's call it that 4-horse accumulator, and 1 doesn't run, your whole bet is gone. That's the dangers of anti-post betting, but also the beauty of it. So you have to be careful with that. If you were to put that into, say, a multiple, like a lucky 15 and 1 didn't run, the legs where that 1 non-runner wasn't involved would still be valid bets, but you would lose a good few of the bets from a lucky 15.
Okay, brilliant. Well, that does it for today's episode. We got quite a lot in there, Dean. Nice succinct overview of anti-post. Thank you very much for coming on and providing us with some wisdom there.
Pleasure. And just remember, when you're betting anti-post, I think there's 3 things to remember. Is my horse likely to turn up, and do I know that for at least a relative amount of certainty? 2, will it have the right conditions on the day that I expect it's going to excel under? And 3, do I think the price I'm going to get right now is better than the price I'm going to get on that day? You have those three ingredients, you got an okay anti-post bet.
Brilliant. Well, there you have it. Dean, really looking forward to chatting again soon on some more horse racing strategy. Make sure to check out Gambling.com today for up-to-date horse racing trends and tips. We will be back next week with another edition of Gamblecast. Until then, goodbye.